Ever catch yourself like totally glued to some crime show, and it's like you're fascinated by the villain's every move. They're like so cold and calculating, and it's just because you chills. But like at the same time, part of you's kind of wondering, like, could I ever be that detached?
Yeah.
It's such a weird mix of fear and fascination, right?
Absolutely. It's a very natural human tendency. I think we were sort of drawn to these extremes of human behavior.
Yeah.
Especially the darker sides.
Yeah.
It's like we get to peek into a forbidden room or something and glimpse something that's both unsettling and intriguing at the same time.
100%. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. So the question is, are you a psychopath? Now, before you start looking over your shoulders, let me just clarify something. This isn't about labeling anyone okay. It's about unpacking this term that gets thrown around so casually.
Right.
And, separating those myths from what's actually going on clinically.
Exactly. Yeah, we're bombarded with these quizzes online all the time, like, am I a psychopath? But they're often more about sensationalism than substance,
Right.
So this deep dive is really about going beyond that clickbait and exploring, like, what psychopathy really means, both clinically and, how we perceive it in our everyday lives.
So let's start by just addressing the elephant in the room. Why are we so captivated by this whole idea of psychopathy? Why are books and movies and even like the news headlines, constantly filled with these like seemingly cold-hearted individuals?
I think it's partly because it taps into like our primal instincts, right? Like we're wired to be wary of danger.
Right.
And these psychopathic traits, which are often associated with manipulation and lack of empathy, can signal like a potential threat.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also, I think, about this intrigue with the unknown. Psychopaths sort of challenge our understanding of human nature.
Yeah.
They force us to confront the possibility that not everyone operates with the same moral compass.
It's like trying to solve this puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing. We try to figure out their motivations, what's going on in their heads, but we kind of hit a wall because their actions just defy like all of our expectations of normal behavior.
Exactly. And that gap, I think, between our expectations and their actions is really what creates that sense of mystery and that desire to understand, what makes them tick.
Totally. Okay, so let's debunk some of the myths around this.
Yeah.
First one, all psychopaths are violent criminals lurking in the shadows, true or false?
Definitely false. While psychopathy is a risk factor for criminal behavior, it's not a guarantee.
Okay.
In fact, a lot of individuals with psychopathic traits function very well in society. Sometimes they even excel in certain professions.
Now, that's a curveball.
Yeah.
So are we talking like the charming CEO who ruthlessly climbs the corporate ladder, or like that smooth-talking salesperson who could convince anyone to buy anything?
Those are definitely examples that fit the stereotype.
Yeah.
But it's not always that obvious. Psychopaths can be incredibly adept at blending in. They use their charm and their charisma to their advantage.
So how do we separate like the Hollywood version from the actual clinical reality? What does psychopathy actually look like in a diagnostic sense?
So clinically, psychopathy is considered a personality disorder, and it's characterized by a specific cluster of traits. And it's often assessed using something called the Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised, or the PCLR.
Okay.
And this tool evaluates various factors, including things like glibness and superficial charm, a grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, manipulativeness, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, lack of empathy, a parasitic lifestyle, poor behavioral controls, and impulsivity.
Whoa, that's quite a list. But if these traits can be present in people who aren't criminals, how do clinicians actually diagnose someone with psychopathy? Is it really just ticking off boxes on a checklist?
Not at all. It's a very complex process that goes way beyond just identifying a few traits. A trained professional will conduct a really in-depth assessment, and they're considering the individual's history, their behavior patterns, and the impact of those traits on their own life and the lives of others.
So it's not just about like, oh, they have these traits, but it's the degree to which they have them and how they actually show up in the person's life.
Exactly. It's about the pervasiveness, the intensity of these traits, and how they affect the individual's ability to function in a pro-social way.
Okay.
For example, somebody might exhibit a certain degree of superficial charm in social situations, but it's like the manipulative intent behind that charm that kind of distinguishes it as a psychopathic trait.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about just like slapping a label on someone based on a few things they do, but it's about understanding the underlying personality structure and how that affects their interactions with the world.
Exactly.
Now, I know you said ditch the online quizzes, but can we like play with one of those classic psychopath riddles just to show how easy it is to misinterpret these concepts?
I suppose one wouldn't hurt as long as we keep in mind that this is for illustrative purposes only and not for self-diagnosis.
For sure. All right, listeners, get those thinking caps on. Here's the riddle. A woman is at her mother's funeral, and while she's there, she meets a man she's never seen before and finds him incredibly attractive. She falls head over heels, but she doesn't get his name or contact information. A few days later, she kills her sister. What's her motive?
Take a moment to think about that. What's the first explanation that pops into your head?
Don't overthink it. Just go with that gut reaction.
So the supposedly psychopathic answer is that she killed her sister, hoping the man would show up at the funeral.
Okay, that's dark, but let's break down why this answer is super misleading.
So firstly, it plays on our preconceived notions of psychopaths as being, inherently callous and manipulative. It assumes the worst possible motive without really considering any other possibilities.
So it's like saying, oh, anyone who enjoys a good horror movie must secretly be a serial killer in the making.
Right, exactly. It's a huge leap in logic.
Yeah.
And this riddle highlights the danger of jumping to conclusions about somebody's internal state just based on their actions, especially in a complex and emotionally charged situation like a funeral.
It also ignores the fact that grief can show up in all sorts of unexpected ways.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's experiencing a profound loss, they might act impulsively, they might do something irrational without necessarily having any bad intentions.
Precisely, this riddle, while thought-provoking, is a really good example of how easy it is to misinterpret behavior and attribute it to psychopathy without considering the full context.
So it's super crucial to remember that these riddles, they're not diagnostic tools. They're more like those funhouse mirrors that kind of distort our perceptions and reinforce stereotypes instead of giving us any real insights into human behavior.
And speaking of perceptions, how we view ourselves and others plays a huge role in how we understand these complex personality traits. So to explore that further, we need to look at a model known as the Big Five personality traits.
The Big Five sounds intriguing.
It's a framework that helps us understand this whole spectrum of human personality. It goes beyond those simplistic labels.
So it's not about just categorizing people as good or bad, psychopath or not.
Exactly. The Big Five basically proposes that our personalities are shaped by 5 broad dimensions.
Okay.
Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Gotcha.
And each of us falls somewhere on the spectrum for each trait, creating this unique personality profile.
Okay. 5 big words. Let's break them down. What's openness to experience?
Think of it as your appetite for novelty and exploration.
Okay.
Someone high in openness really thrives on new ideas, diverse cultures, and creative pursuits.
Yeah.
They might be like the adventurous traveler, the art enthusiast, or the voracious reader.
So that friend who's always dragging you to that new fusion restaurant or suggesting a weekend trip to some remote island.
Exactly. On the other end of the spectrum, someone low in openness might prefer routine and familiarity.
Yeah.
They're grounded, they're practical, and they value tradition.
Makes sense. What about conscientiousness?
So conscientiousness is all about organization, self-discipline, and reliability.
Okay.
Think of the meticulous planner, the colleague who always meets their deadlines.
Right.
Or that friend whose apartment is always impeccably organized.
They probably color code their calendars and actually enjoy doing laundry.
Quite possibly they thrive on structure and order. Now, someone low in conscientiousness might be more spontaneous and flexible. They might struggle with deadlines, but they often bring this refreshing dose of creativity and adaptability to the table.
So it's not about one being better than the other. It's just different approaches to life.
Exactly.
What about extroversion? Is that just about being a people person?
It's not entirely. Extroversion is more about where you draw your energy from and how you kind of engage with the world.
Okay.
People high in extroversion are energized by social interaction. They're outgoing, assertive, often the life of the party.
Yeah, I can picture them effortlessly working a room, radiating charisma.
Exactly. And then you have those lower in extroversion, often called introverts.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily shy, but they recharge through solitude, and they prefer deeper, more meaningful connections over those large gatherings.
So it's about where you find your energy sweet spot, not just how many friends you have on Facebook.
Exactly.
All right, on to agreeableness. Is this just about being nice?
Agreeableness goes a bit deeper than just being polite. It reflects your concern for others and your willingness to cooperate. So people high in agreeableness are compassionate, empathetic, and trusting.
Yeah.
They prioritize harmony, and they genuinely care about others' well-being.
That's like that friend you can always count on.
Yeah.
The one who will lend a listening ear and offer a helping hand without any hesitation.
Precisely. They're the peacemakers, the ones who kind of bridge divides and foster understanding.
Yeah.
No, someone lower in agreeableness might be more skeptical, more assertive, and prioritize their own needs.
Right.
This doesn't make them bad people,
Right.
but they might be more direct and less concerned with pleasing everyone.
So it's about finding that balance between asserting yourself
Yeah.
and also maintaining harmony in those relationships.
Exactly.
Last but not least, what is neuroticism?
Neuroticism is about your emotional stability and your tendency to experience those negative emotions.
Okay.
So those high in neuroticism might be prone to anxiety, worry, and mood swings. They're more sensitive to stress, and they might dwell on things more than others.
I'm guessing they're the ones who overthink every decision and constantly play out worst case scenarios in their head.
That's one way to look at it, but the sensitivity can also be a strength.
Okay.
They might be highly attuned to nuances and details that others miss on the flip side. Someone low in neuroticism is generally calm, resilient, and less fazed by setbacks.
So it's about how intensely you experience those emotions and how you cope with life's ups and downs.
Exactly.
Okay, so this Big Five model paints a pretty detailed picture of personality, but how does it actually relate back to those dark traits and psychopathy?
That's where the aha moment comes in. Remember, we're talking about a spectrum.
Right.
Someone low in agreeableness and conscientiousness might be impulsive and disregard rules traits that we see in psychopathy.
Oh.
But it's that extreme manifestation, the lack of remorse or empathy that sets it apart.
So someone who's constantly cutting lines and breaking rules just to see what they can get away with.
That could be an indicator. But it's crucial to look at the bigger picture. The Big Five helps us understand that everyone has this unique mix of traits, some of which might be considered darker than others.
It's like saying that everyone has a spice rack, but it's that specific combination of spices and how much you use that creates that unique flavor profile.
Precisely. And just like you wouldn't label a dish bad because it has a hint of chili pepper, you shouldn't jump to conclusions about someone's character based on a few isolated traits.
Right.
It's the overall blend, the intensity, and the impact on their actions that matter.
This really underscores that understanding personality is about nuance, not labels. It's about appreciating the complexity of human nature and recognizing that we all fall somewhere on these spectrums.
Exactly. And by understanding those nuances, we can kind of move beyond those simplistic judgments and develop a more compassionate understanding of ourselves and others.
This has been so insightful. Before we wrap things up, I'm curious about empathy, especially given its crucial role in distinguishing psychopathy from other personality profiles. What makes empathy such a vital ingredient in the whole human experience?
Empathy is really like the cornerstone of human connection.
Yeah.
It's that ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, to step into their shoes and see the world through their eyes.
So it's not just about feeling sorry for someone, but actually feeling with them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing their emotions, understanding their perspective, and responding in a way that shows you care.
Right.
Empathy allows us to build those meaningful relationships, resolve conflicts peacefully, and create a more compassionate and supportive society.
So without empathy, we'd essentially be living in a world of emotional isolation, unable to truly connect with each other.
Imagine a world where everyone is just solely focused on their own needs and perspectives, unable to understand or share those joys and sorrows of others. That's a world without empathy.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. But here's the question that's been swirling in my mind. If empathy is so crucial, can it be learned and strengthened? Or are we stuck with whatever level we're born with?
That's a question that's fascinated researchers and psychologists for decades.
Yeah.
And the encouraging news is that empathy, while influenced by our genetics and those early experiences, is also a skill that can be cultivated and strengthened throughout life.
So it's like a muscle that we can exercise and develop over time.
Exactly. And there are many ways to kind of flex those empathy muscles.
Okay.
Active listening is a really powerful tool.
Yeah.
It's about truly hearing what someone is saying, paying attention to those nonverbal cues, and making a conscious effort to understand their perspective, even if you don't necessarily agree with it.
So it's about putting aside your own judgments and really stepping into that other person's shoes.
Precisely. Another powerful way to cultivate empathy is through perspective-taking exercises.
Okay.
This involves actively imagining yourself in someone else's situation, considering their thoughts, feelings, and motivations. You can try this with people you know well. as well as with strangers or even like fictional characters.
So it's like a mental workout for your empathy muscles, expanding your capacity to understand and connect with all these diverse experiences.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of storytelling, whether through books, movies, or even listening to someone share their personal experiences. Immersing ourselves in stories allows us to step outside our own limited perspective and connect with the emotional lives of others.
This makes me think of that saying, the more you read, the more you know, the more you know, the more you understand. It seems like empathy thrives on understanding.
Absolutely. The more we expose ourselves to different perspectives and those life experiences, the more we develop our capacity for empathy and compassion. It's a lifelong journey of learning and growth.
This has been an eye-opening exploration of personality, empathy, and the complexities of the human experience. But before we wrap up our deep dive into the question, are you a psychopath? We need to address a crucial distinction, the difference between having some dark traits and actually having a clinical diagnosis of psychopathy.
That's an essential point. We've all probably exhibited some of those so-called dark triad traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy at some point in our lives.
Yeah.
It's part of the spectrum of human behavior.
I'll admit, I've definitely felt a twinge of those traits when someone cuts me off in traffic or takes the last slice of pizza.
Right.
But that doesn't make me a psychopath, right?
Exactly. Having a fleeting moment of frustration or acting in your own self-interest occasionally doesn't qualify as a personality disorder.
Right.
It's about the intensity, the pervasiveness, and the impact of those traits.
So it's not about judging ourselves or others based on a few isolated incidents.
Precisely. And that's where those online quizzes can be so misleading.
Yeah.
They lack the nuance and context of a proper clinical evaluation. A diagnosis of psychopathy involves a very comprehensive assessment by a trained mental health professional, considering an individual's history, their behavior patterns, and the impact of their traits on their life and the lives of others.
It's like the difference between self-diagnosing based on a web search and actually consulting with a doctor for like a thorough examination.
Exactly. And just as you wouldn't rely solely on a symptom checker for a complex medical condition, you shouldn't base your understanding of psychopathy on those superficial quizzes or like pop culture portrayals.
So while it's natural to be curious about these aspects of human nature, it's crucial to approach them with like a critical and informed perspective.
Absolutely. And if you ever have concerns about your own mental health or the behavior of someone you know, the best course of action is to reach out to a qualified professional for guidance and support.
This has been an incredibly insightful journey into the world of psychopathy personality and the power of empathy. But hold on to your hats, listeners, because we're about to wrap things up with some final thoughts that'll leave you pondering the complexities of human nature long after this episode ends. All right, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the question, are you a psychopath?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, hasn't it? Exploring those myths and the clinical realities and, of course, this fascinating spectrum of human personality.
For sure, we've learned that psychopathy is not just about, villainous characters in movies or sensationalized headlines.
Right.
It's a very complex clinical diagnosis with a really specific set of traits, most notably that profound lack of empathy.
Exactly.
Than those, am I a psychopath?
Yeah.
Quizzes online. More for entertainment than any actual insight.
Yeah, they might spark curiosity, but they definitely can't replace a proper evaluation by a trained professional.
Right. We also discovered that personality is this like vibrant tapestry woven from this unique blend of traits.
Right.
And we all have those aspects that might be, fall on the darker end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But it's really the intensity, the pervasiveness, and the impact of those traits that matter the most.
Exactly. Having a few dark tendencies doesn't make you a psychopath.
Right.
It makes you human. It's about recognizing those traits within ourselves, understanding their potential influence, and then choosing how we actually want to navigate the world.
And speaking of navigating the world, we can't forget the crucial role of empathy.
Right.
It's like that bridge that connects us, that allows us to understand and share each other's experiences,
Yes.
build those meaningful relationships, and create a more compassionate society.
Empathy is that antidote to the isolation and disconnect that can sometimes come from just focusing solely on our own needs and perspectives.
Totally. And the best part is empathy is a skill we can actually cultivate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about actively listening, stepping into the shoes of others, and expanding our capacity for compassion through storytelling and being exposed to all those diverse perspectives.
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey of learning and growth, for sure. And the more we invest in, developing those empathy muscles, the richer and more fulfilling our lives become, both individually and collectively.
100%.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thought you want our listeners to take away from this?
If empathy is a skill, what small step can you take today to practice it in your own life?
Yeah.
Maybe it's really truly listening to a friend who's going through a tough time, or trying to understand the perspective of someone you just completely disagree with. Even those smallest acts of empathy, they can really have a ripple effect, creating a more understanding and compassionate world.
Such a powerful reminder to end on. Remember, understanding the nuances of human nature, including those darker aspects, allows us to approach ourselves and others with much more compassion and insight.
And for those of you who are hungry for more deep dives into those fascinating topics, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts. We'll help you cut through the noise and get to that truly insightful stuff.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.